Hi, apologies for those who didn't want to come see me. Nobody voted for me, so unlucky. So my name's Breen. I'm going to talk about some remote access Trojans and IOCs. I am SAN certified, reverse engineer malware, and I'm an independent researcher and blogger. So my views are my own and not of the employer I work for. I'm not going to tell you who it is. So that's what my friends think I do. That's what my wife thinks I do. That's what work think I do, and that's pretty much what I really do. If I was told, who needs malware engineers when you've got VT? So what I'm going to talk about is what a rat is, who uses them, what's in them, why am I so interested in them, grabbing the useful stuff out of them. We're going to make it easy, and then we're going to look at how we can share all this information with the community. So what is a rat? A rat is a remote access Trojan or a tool, depending on whether you're the good guy or the bad guy. Uses a client-server configuration. That's slightly backwards to how a normal enterprise client-server is. The server is sent out to all the end users. The client is sat on my box as the attacker. So it is really backwards. And they're typically reverse connection. So when you run the file, you will connect to me rather than me attempting to connect to you. So like I said, the server side sits the infected side. And if you get one of these on your machine, it gives me full unfederated access to your machine. Not only to the machine that I'm on, but also to the wider network. Anything you can do, I can quite literally do better if I get a rat implanted on your box. So Blackshades rat. Blackshades is a publicly available remote access tool for sale. I appreciate that's a bit difficult for you to read. Blackshades is mainly an IT surveillance and security-based organization directed at making your PC experience easier. Our main goal is to offer affordable software solutions and so on and so forth. So they make themselves seem legitimate. How many legitimate pieces of software would include ransomware as an option? So this option is by de facto in Blackshades and will allow you to encrypt any file on your box and then display a message to the user saying, I've encrypted your files, give me something in return. So yes, they try to market them, they sell them. There's actually a really big market for these things. Blackshades is about $40. You have to pay for this. And then the bad guy thought, you know, a lot of people are buying this and they're infecting lots of machines and this is being used everywhere. I want more for my money. So the author of Blackshades actually put a back door into every single server that goes out. So when the bad guys are out infecting all their slaves, they're actually infecting their slaves with a backdoored server. So they've got access, Blackshades have got access, whoever Blackshades sell it to got access. So it's a massive, massive thing. So who uses them? Script Kiddies use them. That's the 12-year-old boy in his basement. E-crime groups, your big Russian e-crimes, they use these. And APT use them. Script Kiddies, they like to do that. These are taken straight from some hacking forums. So he started this thread so he can share his best moments with all his female slaves. This guy, he was told he was lying, so he added proof. A YouTube video he'd streamed of her as he was hacking a webcam on her Facebook. This guy's really happy. He currently has 126 slaves online. He's aiming for 200. This guy's not so happy though. He was listening in on her mic. He ordered calling the police, and he didn't have his VPN turned on, so he's being traced. And this guy, his slave got his mummy to call the police. So it sort of gives you the level of people we're talking about. We're really not talking about you know, adults. These are kids who have managed to get all of this publicly available software, and they're just sending it out there. These people, the way they typically tend to distribute is they'll look at whatever the favorite One Direction song is. They'll rename their server to be onedirection.mp3, send that out as a torrent or upload it as a YouTube video and wait for somebody to come and click on it. Somebody clicks on it, they get the rat installed, they're none the wiser. E-crime syndicates. So Symantec pushed a report out last month, at the end of last month, detailing this is a publicly available rat that's out there in the wild. It's being actively used by e-crime groups, and this is massive. APT, anywhere you look in the news over the last year, and you'll see that APT is using rats. Terminator, they're all over the place. So what the APT groups tend to do is they'll throw this rat at you and use this as a first stage implant. Do this for a couple of reasons. One, it's a nice simple piece of malware. They haven't had to expose their big, the stuff they've spent fortunes building privately. And also it's low attribution. These are all publicly available. The whole world uses them. So if you were to get one of these infected on your box, how can you turn around and say that's state-sponsored attacks and not say that's some kid in his basement who's accidentally infected you? So it's that level of deniability that makes this a really useful first stage implant. That, and they are ridiculously powerful. So that's what they are, that's who uses them. So let's have a look and see what we can get at them. So because a rat is reverse connecting, all the information is already contained inside the exe file. So it lands on your machine, it has all the information it needs to talk back. So domains and IP addresses, passwords, anything they're using. If they're encrypting the link, the passwords are in there, the ports are in there. When this thing goes to install on your box, file names, file paths, registry keys, mutexes, all this information is natively stored inside that file you've just got on your box. So basically, the bad guys just said, here, have every single piece of information you want to defend yourself against me, to find me, and to locate me. They're giving it all to you. So grabbing the config, so we know all this stuff's in there, and this is the more technical bit. So I just did the workshop, which took you through some of the stages we go to do this. So a lot of these configs, a lot of these rats are poison ivy, was massively used. The config's in clear. Beacon domains, port numbers, installation names, it's all in clear text. So simply opening it up in something like strings, or in a hex editor, and you're going to see all this information immediately in front of you. Sometimes they're encrypted. With the encrypted stuff, we still need to find the password. Apologies, that's not very clear on the bottom. When they encrypt it, the method of encryption has to be included in the exe file. So the encryption key's there, the encryption scheme is there, everything you need is sat inside it. So what we can do is when we start to analyze this, we look for the encryption key, we take the encryption key out and decode it. And most of the time this comes in a couple of places. It's either sat in a resource section or it's just appended on the end of the file. And depending on how we go for time, I have a couple of demos we can go through at the end and show you how simple it is just to pop these bits of information out. So now we know what we're looking for, let's make it easy. So I've spent the last 2-3 months looking at rats, and I've done all that hard work for you. So I've released 23 scripts, all hosted on my GitHub, and this will do all the work for you. So you put any rat in there, as long as it recognizes it and understands it, then it'll just extract that config for you and give it in a nice, easy way for you to view. And then secondary, it's what the main project designed around is malwareconfig.com. So what I've done is I've taken a massive repository of malware, over 16 million samples, publicly available malware. Of that, I've indexed it, I've sorted it, I've filtered it, and I've extracted about 45,000 remote access Trojans. From those, they're all currently being indexed into the site. And I'll show you the site a little bit later on. So we've got the config, so how can we use this? So defensively, it's nice and simple. Firewall rules, port filters, looking through logs, snort rules, and IOC files. So these are all things we can do very quickly to start providing defense against the estate. Now, this doesn't really apply for those Script Kiddie kind of attacks, because nobody in their corporate environment is really going to get infected with those. But as we've seen, this is massively used by APT and e-crime. So if we get a sample, we get a spearfish sample in, we've got that exe file, we decode it, we take all that information out. I can now write firewall rules or snort rules to explicitly block and stop that. Or, depending on what my infrastructure is like, then I can allow those connections in, limit them coming in, and then see what they're doing. So there's a lot of intelligence to be gained. And again, this is all sent directly to you. They give you everything you need to figure this out. For those of you who are that way inclined, you can also go offensive with this. Now, I'll leave the morality of offensive security up to the individuals. I'm not saying go and do this by any means. But again, you've got all their information. You've got their domain name, that gives you your IP address. You have the port number, that gives you a socket, and you have their password. So I now have everything I need to create a legitimate connection back to you with the attacker. So what can I do with that? I can DOS the attacker. I know your IP address and your port, so what can I do? I will fake 3,000 remote connections to your box. Make your client unusable. You're now either forced to switch passwords, switch IP addresses, switch ports, switch your whole infrastructure, which now means that whole campaign you've just done, completely useless to you. Anybody else you've managed to infect, if you haven't just targeted me, you've targeted other people on the same infrastructure, they're now useless to you as well, because you can no longer figure out what are the real connections from the thousands of connections I'm sending you every second. That's one way of doing it. The other way is to exploit the attacker. So a couple of big ones, Poison Ivy and Dark Comet. They're well known, they're well used, and they've been used by APT groups for the last several years, and they're still being used now. There are two public exploits. Poison Ivy has a Metasploit module, so if you know the password, the port, and the IP address, you can actually get a remote shell on their box. Well, they sent us all that information inside the exit file, so there we go. Any Poison Ivy implant, I can now start just dropping shells on your box. I currently have 13,500 live Poison Ivy domains and passwords. So there's a whole lot of infrastructure out there you could just start going and taking control of. Dark Comet again, so Dark Comet, there's no remote code execution, but what there is for Dark Comet is arbitrary file access. So if I know a file path on your machine, you the attacker, I can just go and download that file from your machine back to me. This has one really, really useful thing. The way Dark Comet works is it logs every single connection. Every connection attempt and all the information that comes back with it is logged and stored in a SQLite database. That SQLite database is in one place. So using my arbitrary file read, I can now go pull that database down. That tells me anybody who has ever connected to your machine. It gives me all their keylogs as well. So every piece of information you've just managed to scrape, I now also have that as well. And there are a lot more. Most of the rats that are out there have some sort of vulnerability in them that if you were to take the time and the research to go through, you could probably find yourself doing the more offensive side of this. Again, I'm not advocating that everybody starts hacking Script Kiddies, but it's an option. So like I said, I have a large data set and I like to share. I've spent a lot of time doing the research, and rather than just keeping it all to myself, I like to share with the community. As I said, IOC files. I know the industry hasn't really settled on an IOC format. So for those of you not familiar with IOC, it's an indicator of compromise. And these are files you can create that you can share with admins and other providers, and you can use these to identify infections. There's lots of them. There's OpenIOC, Stix, Taxi. There are plenty of formats out there. IOC Bucket is a service that's up and running where you can share these IOCs. Every rat that lands on, that gets processed by my box, I extract the file path, the registry keys, the mutexes, the domains, the ports, create an IOC file to that, and that gets pushed over to IOC Bucket as well. So there's a massive repository of known malware. One of the really useful things about this method, it's impossible to have a false positive. You've extracted the config straight out of the sample exactly as it is. So it's impossible to get a false positive on that. VirusTotal, they have every sample. So any sample that's submitted to me, I'll check VirusTotal. If VirusTotal has it, I'll link to them and say, here's more information on it. And then if they don't have it, I'll push the sample up to them, and then there's a big cross-reference there. Standalone decoders, I mentioned these earlier. So I've done 23 so far. I have another 26 odd to write. So head over to my Git, pull these decoders down, and you can just run these. They're just Python on pretty much standard Python modules. And then malware config. I've got links at the end. The other thing I've done, is there anybody who does reverse engineering in here? Really isn't my crowd, is it? Sorry for those of you who I'm boring. So, Viper is made by a guy who wrote Cuckoo. It's an automated analysis platform. He works for Rapid7. And it's a framework, that's a modular framework for reverse engineering malware. So gone are the days where you need geeks like me to sit and stare at the assembly and figure this all out for you. There are nice modular frameworks where anybody with a little bit of knowledge can just open up Viper, import the exe file, and then just run modules like rat analysis, and then it just pops straight out. So you don't need to rely on, if you're working for a small business who's still getting targeted by these, and you can't afford to either outsource or create your own reverse engineering malware team, then things like this exist out on the internet where you can go and use these. As long as you're not too concerned about publicly broadcasting this, there's lots of this out there. There's a screenshot of it working. So malware config, like I said, it's a public site that I've set up. Allows you to submit files up to be analysed, and you can search, and there is an API coming soon. These are the sort of things it'll pull out. So there you can see this was a sample of poison ivy. This is non-interactive analysis. So at no point do I run the executable file and allow it to connect out to the internet. I don't allow it to connect back to the attacker's side. It's all run non-interactive, all static analysis. So there's no way the bad guys, unless they come and search the site, will see these connections coming in. So you get all the values in the config file. There's the virus total lookup. We'll do the domain and IP lookup. So if there's a domain name, it'll grab you the IP. If it's got an IP, it'll grab the country code. So if you start plotting all this together, you can really start to pull together some really interesting piece of information. For those of you running IDS, this will automatically generate you a snort rule. So you can deploy this straight onto a sensor, and you've got immediate alerts to any time this lands on your box. Yara rules. Yara is, I like to Yara snort for malware, but again, I'm talking to the wrong audience, so I'm afraid none of you can understand that. So Yara is signature-based detection on the host. So IDS, intrusion detection systems, these look at the network analysis, and these look at all the ones and zeros crossing the wire, and they'll analyze that, and they'll alert you on that. Yara does the same sort of principle, except it works on your box. So it's a bit like antivirus, except that this is a lot more powerful than your antivirus. Antiviruses tend to use more heuristic analysis than they do with string analysis, and they rely more on looking at what happens when a file runs. So pretty much everybody should know that antivirus is fairly well broken and can be trivially bypassed and evaded. As far as static analysis goes, what it's really hard to trick antivirus is at runtime. So DLL injection, process injection, nobody should really be doing these things. So AV's got really good at detecting that. Yara applies these sort of principles to a static analysis, and they're really good at identifying malware families. And as we said before, you can jump out IOC files, so you can natively just pull these IOCs. So the IOC that's being used at the minute is Mandiant's, or Mandiant FireEye's open IOC format. So if you think you've been infected with one of these rats, you push it up to malware config, you download the IOC file. You then deploy Mandiant's IOC agent across your entire estate, upload this one file, and it will instantly tell you every machine that's infected with it. So you don't need to pay big incident response teams to come in. You don't need to do a lot of this work yourself. With freely available tools and freely available resources, you can now just upload, download, scan, and get a full indication of if your network's compromised or not. So as I said, I like to share. So as I'm building this database, I'm building a massive, massive list of known bad malware. And what's of most interest to people is this information. So the domain names, the IP addresses. So most of the bad guys, what they like to do is they don't like using their own IP address. They'll use dynamic DNS. And the big ones are, again, it's really poor quality on there. It's no IP, DynDNS, Zapto.org, all these free DNS providers where you just sign up, get a domain name, and then associate that with your IP address. This means you can change IP address, you can change domain names very trivially without having to redo your whole C2 infrastructure. What it does mean is it's a way of us to track you though. Recently I upset a couple of thousand Script Kiddies. So I ran several thousand samples through this, pulled out 2,800 no IP, DynDNS, and lots more domain names. I reached out to a couple of the security lists I'm on and said, you know, anybody have any idea what I can do with this data? I've got it, I can't use it, can anybody else use it? Within hours, I'd got responses back from GoDaddy, from no IP, from DynDNS saying, give me that information, give me those IP addresses, and they then cancelled all the accounts. So it's really funny from my side. So as I'm doing all this research, as I'm analysing these rats, I have to go out and get the actual build kits. So I have to go into the underground forums and into where all the Script Kiddies are, where they get their tools, so I can get them as well. So I've been in there, I've got the tools. I published the paper a couple of weeks ago. All those get taken down. I go back in to check and see if there are any updates. And there's lots of entries of kids crying because their no IP accounts have been cancelled, and I've lost all my slaves and I can't spy on the pretty girls anymore. So it's very funny. It's really gratifying when you can publish this sort of work and you see that sort of response. So I'm a superhero. I have just saved people's internet, and that's how I see myself. So yeah, there's a lot you can get out of this. And like I said, it's all about sharing. A lot of people, the community used to take this information and they sit on it. You know, this is mine. This is an attack against me. I'm not going to release any of this information. And what really kicked it off was actually Mandiant with the APT1 report. Is anybody not familiar with the APT1 report? Yeah, so they were really big at, you know, saying, you know, enough is enough. We're really going to start outing people. And that's what this is hoping to contribute to. I have all this information. I have all these lists of bad people doing bad things on the internet. And they're not just Script Kiddies. They're not just kids looking at girls' cameras. There's APT groups. There's e-crime groups. There are people on here making absolute fortunes out of your computers. So if I can run this and start sharing that information, then the internet's a safer place, then more the merrier for it. So the future, like I said, I've created about 23 so far. I have 26 more, which I'm in the process of writing, so releasing those soon. Expanded to other malware families. So for the last few months, well, for the last 8 months, I've been researching only rats, only remote access Trojans. But as I've been grabbing build kits, there's a lot of tie-over between things like keyloggers, Zeus, SpyEye. They all use very similar tactics. They've all got a configuration file that's included in the malware they send to you. They're giving us everything we need. So I'm expanding out to those families as well, using the same techniques and principles that I apply to rats, applying it to those as well. Reverse engineering to the masses. You don't need reverse engineering degrees to run this stuff. It's a little bit of logic, run my script, and away you go. Volatility plugins, again, really focusing this at the wrong audience. If you're doing instant response, it's one thing having the exe file and then you can pull this config out. Most of the time, if you're going into instant response, you're arriving after the fact. So this exe file that was on there is probably gone now to be replaced with other stages of malware. But everything's in memory. So I'm currently writing volatility plugins that do exactly the same thing. They'll take a memory sample, they'll look for those indicators, they'll look for those things that mark this piece of malware, extract it out, and run exactly the same thing, give you all that information. And then, like I said, they'll be coming to a Git near you soon-ish, as soon as I finish writing them. It's really hard writing all this while you're doing a day job as well. Again, apologies, I didn't anticipate the slides. These are I like to stand on the shoulders of giants. If somebody else has done the hard work for me, then I will happily take their research and then build on that. But I won't seal it for myself. I'll actually give them credit, which I've hidden so nobody can read it. So the guys at MalwareLU, one of the first pieces of malware I ever started to research was Extreme Wrap. The guys at MalwareLU, they did a really nice write-up. FireEye, Mandiant, they're constantly releasing more information out to the public. Who else is on there? Matsano. So there were a couple of guys, they wrote a paper looking at offensively targeting rats. It's a really good paper. They didn't look at the static decode side of stuff, but as part of their research, they figured out all the encryption schemas, which means when I was putting my work together, it was 3 less steps I had to do. So they saved me a lot of work. Are there any questions? Yes?
How would you ever go about having a remote Trojan that didn't carry its own config?
So you can't really have a remote Trojan that doesn't carry its own config because by nature they're reverse connection. So the only way you do that is if you have a listener. So I drop something on your box and then I have to actively connect to you. And then I connect to you when I'm telling you. So you're only listening. So all you have to know is a port number and possibly a password to authenticate my connection. They don't really do that. The way rats were designed is because of the way reverse connections work, these things sail straight through firewalls because we implicitly trust the inside to NAT all the way through rather than blocking the other way. So you could. I've researched 132 rats. I have yet to see one that doesn't do that, with one exception. There is a family of rats that are PHP based. So they launch a web interface, a web shell on your box rather than a remote connection. But it's the same sort of principle. It still has to contain all that sort of information.
Could you imagine a way that the config was carried in a different way? Like maybe it could, I don't know, maybe connect to a distributed network and make its config that way?
Yeah, so Zeus does this. So Zeus isn't a remote access Trojan, it's a botnet, although it has the same kind of functionality. What that does is it has a single lookup, and what it does is it actually goes and collects its config file from out on the internet. So it knows that my config file is 123.dat, which is sat on this URL. So it just does a GET request for that, pulls that down, then we'll decrypt it in real time on the box. But again, when we start to analyze this, we can pull that first request down. It's got to go out somewhere, it's got to pull something down. Now I can check my logs, see if that file's ever been pulled down. I can look at the box, see if that file exists on the box, and then I can tell that way. So there are ways of doing that. There are a couple of Ghost Rat. Ghost Rat is a fully fledged rat and does something very similar. The actual config file is just a single base64 encoded line at the end, which is just a URL. And it goes out to the URL, pulls down the config file, unpacks it, and then installs it into memory. But the good thing about that is it uses something very similar. So it saves that config file on the disk now. So if I go in as an incident response handler, I can grab that config. And again, it's always got to interact. It has to do something. So as long as I can figure out what it's doing in the first place, then it gives me something to pivot on. So I can start blocking, if I've got IDS or IPS, I can block those. If I've got firewall access, I can start implicitly blocking those as well. No more? So how am I doing for time? As this is not my audience, I won't bore you going through a technical demonstration, unless anybody really wants to see a technical demonstration. I didn't think so. Apologies that you got me instead of who you were really here to see, but thank you very much.